The following marketing information and discussion is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as professional guidance or consultancy. You should find an agency for that. Comexis is a digital marketing agency, so feel free to hire us. But otherwise, just enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, welcome to The Buyer's Journey by Comexis, a discussion-based podcast on the ever-changing marketing landscape. I'm Matthew McGroarty, the social media content producer here at Comexis.
And I'm Josh Lyons, the digital marketing coordinator here at Comexis.
As I mentioned last episode, Len is a little bit busy at the moment these last couple days, so me and Josh are taking over the podcast hosting capabilities to allow Len to get the time that he needs to get his work in. It's Thursday, so normally on Thursdays we talk about the retention phase of the buyer's journey, but today we're going to be talking about something just a little bit different because we thought it was really cool. Does have the potential to sort of play in with retention. Retention, for those who need a refresher, is when your customer or a former customer has already purchased something from you and you are trying to retain them for your services or hopefully in the future make them buy another product of yours, etc., etc. And there's a lot of tactics that go in with that. But today we're talking about a new announcement from Google that Google is going to be bringing podcasts directly to the search results screen, both on mobile and on desktop. So a few months back, Google kind of mentioned that this was a possibility, but at their Google I/O conference, they briefly mentioned it. But Zach Renaud-Whedon, founder and head product for Google Podcasts, posted this news on Twitter Thursday morning, saying, quote, "Rolling out this week, you'll be able to search for and play podcasts directly in Google Search across Android, iOS, and desktop browsers. A step forward, making audio a first-class citizen across Google." So right now, if you were to go in and type The Buyer's Journey podcast on Google, you would be able to find our show. Interestingly enough, they seem to link, depending on the show. So for example, if you Googled ours, you would find an ad probably, and then our iTunes store link. But then underneath it, episode listings that play on Google Podcasts. So it's really weird how they did that.
So is it sort of like when you type in Game of Thrones and then on the sidebar it shows, I think it's usually the Wikipedia page, but it's like the Wikipedia page and then it gives like the most recent episodes and then like when the next one airs and the length of the show, like when it started and ended, and so it's sort of like that, except it just pops up the podcast. You could maybe just press play.
So no, it actually pops up as one of the search results, not on any sidebar.
Okay.
So you search for it, and so for example, I'm trying to search for it, our internet's being a tad slow at the moment, but it would just pop up like a regular SERP result, and it's really interesting on that end. So again, I mean, I think this is something that is really interesting. I really like that Google is trying to help push podcasts. Sometimes, especially because they have their Google Podcasts app on Android phones, but specifically if you're using search result pages. So for example, Josh has it pulled up and you can see it lists our Apple Podcasts thing, but then underneath you can see recent episodes, and if you hit play on one of those, it would open up a Google podcast, the podcast's Google app, and now it's playing.
Cool.
Or it will be playing whenever it decides to load the episode.
There it goes.
So there you go. See if we can hear Josh's.
Provided for informational
that beautiful
purposes.
disclaimer.
It is
Thank
not
you,
intended
Josh.
to be used as professional guidance or consultancy.
There you go.
You should find
All right, you can turn that down. So yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say, Josh mentioned his podcast before the show. Josh, can you ask me whatever it was that you were asking me then? Because I have forgotten.
Sure. So the question was ultimately, so it seems as if you were to type in The Buyer's Journey podcast, that it would come up for us, for the Comexis Buyer's Journey podcast. But for the sake of, could you type in relative keywords that are related to the podcast, and assuming of where your ranking is, you could rank to overtake that Google search and your podcast comes up, even if that keyword has nothing to do with what the podcast name is.
So yeah, so something interesting that we noticed was it seems like you need, first off, it seems like you need to have your podcast obviously on Google Podcasts because it's not going to autoplay them from anywhere else. So that's the first thing. But second, it seems like Google, from what they've told us, is that if your podcast is on Google Podcasts, it transcribes the podcast so that way it makes the audio searchable. I don't know how accurate that process is. Right. But to your point, so for example, Josh runs a podcast about the 76ers called
The Fifth Quarter.
The Fifth Quarter. There'll be a link in the blog description if you're interested in listening to that. And if you search the Sixers podcast, you will not find The Fifth Quarter for two reasons. The first reason being that it's not on Google Podcasts, which it should be, Josh. And then
Noted.
Secondly, I don't know how... I think the keyword being in the title of the podcast seems to be important because from all the search results I've seen for Sixers podcast, for example, it always seems like they have Sixers or 76ers in the name.
Right.
Or in the description. Sometimes people will take the title and here's our podcast name, but the title's actually like explanatory. So it'll be like podcast name, a 76ers podcast, right?
Yeah, well, because my example would be, like, for the sake of the buyer's journey, like, could you type in, like, digital marketing podcast or...
Let's find out. My phone's not working, so Josh, you're going to have to use yours.
Yeah, because my idea was, or my thoughts were, could you type in, the relative keywords that you would already try and rank for already, but specifically for the podcast. So if someone doesn't know of what your brand is or what your podcast name is, they could still search that and you could then rank, which then gets you potential new listeners. So I can try it.
It's possible, yeah. Let's find out. We're doing a little live test here. So
digital marketing podcast.
So while Josh looks through that, I'm looking through my notes. So Google says you can enable your podcast to appear in Google search results and Google Podcasts, along with individual episode descriptions and an embedded player for each. The feature is available through Google Search app for Android. And there's a special podcast structure data that you can use to help Google with discovering and understanding your podcast. I will link to all of that in the blog description.
It comes up with a podcast series,
well,
which seems like it's for one specific...
Well, I think these are all podcasts on different things about digital marketing. So, for example, it says podcast series, and then the keyword is digital marketing, and we're seeing a lot of like marketing school, internet marketing, online marketing made easy, blah, blah, blah. So I do think it is at least somewhat keyword dependent, it looks like. No, there's no more to swipe. For the Sixers podcast, there's like 3 pages. So clearly, obviously, keywords are going to be important to this, but it also looks like it's pulling specific episodes.
Yeah, now I'm going to try Digital Marketing Podcast New Jersey and see what happens.
Sure.
So...
Nope, we're not even getting a
comes
podcast
up,
thing.
yeah.
Well, it's in its beginning phases. I mean, at minimum, if you're able to search the name of the podcast, I mean, the buyer's journey is a little bit different because the buyer's journey is more of a concept. But if you type in buyer's journey podcast, you can find it. If Fifth Quarter was on Google, the Google Podcast Store, I'm sure if you typed that in,
it would pop up.
It would appear. Or if you typed in like Fifth Quarter podcast, it would appear.
Right.
So this is just one more step. One less click somebody has to make to actually listen to your show. And that's really kind of the point here, which is just making everything easier and treating podcasts the way they deserve to be. I mean, for example, if you type in like YouTube videos, you will find that YouTube video on a Google search. Most people are already searching YouTube for those though. But my point stands. So that's all we have for today's episode of The Buyer's Journey. Check us out on Comexis.com, YouTube, and anywhere you can get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter at buyers_journey. Thanks for listening. And check us out in Google search results. There you go. All right, now, thank you for listening, folks. Have a great day.